They found him sitting in the cellar, smiling. Around him were 14 bodies, stacked like firewood. He said he didn't kill them. He said he was just counting. And then, he whispered something no one has ever dared repeat. You weren't supposed to hear about Jeremiah Holbrook. In fact, there's a reason every mention of him vanished from local records in 1852. But you're here now. And that means it's already too late. Jeremiah was born in a one-room cabin in Black Hollow, Pennsylvania, a stretch of land the locals swore the sun never quite touched. His mother, Ruth Holbrook, died giving birth in mid-winter. His father, Ezra Holbrook, was a coal miner who spoke to no one and read Latin manuscripts by candlelight. The townsfolk said he collected knowledge the devil left behind, and when Jeremiah turned 6, things started dying. First, it was animals. The family dog, found with its eyes plucked clean. Then birds fell in flocks from the sky whenever the boy walked the fields. By 9, Jeremiah was drawing diagrams in the dirt with bones. Geometry that no child should understand. He spoke in dead languages. He mimicked voices that didn't belong to anyone living. But no one intervened. Because back then, people feared what they didn't understand. And Jeremiah, he understood too much. The bodies came later. In 1851, during a drought so brutal the rivers cracked open like skin, 14 townspeople vanished. And then on the 19th night, Jeremiah was found in the basement of the old Trinity Chapel. He sat with the corpses like they were old friends. Each was marked with a symbol. Circles inside squares, eyes in triangles, spirals that turned counter to time. Symbols still seen today on the dollar bill, in the Vatican, on corporate seals. He told the sheriff one sentence before being locked away. They told me to count. So I did, 14 for the opening. The town burned the chapel the next day, and Jeremiah, he vanished from his cell. Gone? No records, no bones, only a page torn from his father's journal, left behind on the stone floor. Sacrifice is not violence. Sacrifice is symmetry, and symmetry is power. You weren't supposed to hear this. And that's exactly why you need to. They told the town he died in that cell. Told them the boy was mad, a danger, an anomaly. But anomalies don't vanish without a trace. Anomalies don't leave behind symbols that show up centuries later in government buildings, fraternal orders, and global councils. No, Jeremiah Holbrook didn't die. He was taken, recruited, absorbed. Let me ask you something. What if certain children, certain minds, aren't born insane, but are born open? Not broken, but tuned differently. Able to hear frequencies the rest of us block out, frequencies used by the oldest institutions in the world, not to communicate but to control. Jeremiah was the perfect vessel. No attachments, no resistance, no veil. And that's why they came for him. Them isn't folklore. It's not vague. It's not abstract. They have names. They meet in hidden monasteries, beneath ancient universities, and in temples with no windows. Some wear robes, others wear $1,000 suits. But their goals are always the same: harvest the gifted, crush the wild, rewrite the narrative, own the future. These groups, some of them go by names you'd recognize, others go by symbols only, and it's those symbols that matter most. Because once you recognize the pattern, it never unsees you. That spiral Jeremiah drew in blood, it wasn't art. It was a cipher, a geometric key, the same shape found carved under the Vatican archives, the same pattern traced in the sand at Siren during the unauthorized midnight ritual of 2013, and yes, the same design hidden in plain sight in the floor plan of Washington, D.C. It's not a coincidence, it's symmetry. And symmetry, as Jeremiah's father wrote, is the ultimate currency of power. This is how real control operates, not through elections, not through armies, through geometry, through pattern, through ritual. They don't need to kill you to conquer you. They just need to shape the world around you so that you never ask why it feels familiar. Jeremiah wasn't the last. He was the beginning. An experiment in what happens when a human becomes an antenna. And if you're still watching, you're starting to tune in. Are you ready for the next descent? You ever wonder why some patterns follow you? Why the triangle, the eye, the serpent keep showing up in places they shouldn't? On currency, school emblems, emergency response logos, even children's cartoons? That's not branding. That's conditioning. And conditioning isn't education. It's ritual abuse. From the moment you were born, the architecture of your reality was designed, not built, designed. There's a difference. Building is about structure. Design is about influence. And influence is the oldest weapon in human history. Jeremiah Holbrook was introduced to this system when he was still learning to walk. But make no mistake, you were too, through lullabies that aren't what they seem, through fairy tales that end in dismemberment, through games that mirror ancient pagan invocations disguised as innocent fun. Ring around the rosy, mass plague, Pocket full of posies? Funeral flowers. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. That rhyme didn't survive centuries because children liked it. It survived because it encoded trauma. A nursery spell designed to normalize mass death and submission. This is the same framework used in secret institutions like the Tavistock Institute, which doesn't just study psychology, it engineers behavior on a civilizational scale. Media, education, pharmaceuticals. Every solution they offer starts with a problem they created, because fear is the leash, and confusion is the collar. That's why Jeremiah became valuable. He wasn't confused. He saw the blueprint. The spirals, the grids, the sacrifices, they weren't madness. They were math. The mathematics of influence, the geometry of control. You see, real power doesn't scream. It whispers. It smiles. It tells you everything is normal, while it tightens the cage one symbol at a time. So when Jeremiah counted those bodies, he wasn't counting victims. He was counting anchors. Each corpse, positioned with purpose. Each symbol, aligned with ancient ley lines the modern world pretends don't exist. Because where those lines converge, energy shifts. And where energy shifts, realities bend. This wasn't a mass murder. It was a map. A ritual lattice. A prototype for what's coming. And it wasn't the last time it happened. You think this story is about the past. No. This story is about you. You think you're watching history. But history was never meant to be watched. It was meant to be relived. Because they don't bury the past to protect you. They bury it to repeat it, quietly, efficiently, behind the veil of progress. Now let me tell you what they did after Jeremiah vanished. The newspapers said nothing. But 4 days later, a man arrived in Black Hollow. No one knew his name. He didn't speak. Didn't blink. He simply walked through the ash of the chapel and left with something wrapped in crimson cloth. Eyewitnesses, those who dared peek, said it pulsed, like it was breathing, and then that man disappeared into the pine forest. He was never seen again. But 3 months later, a private boys' academy opened in Vermont. You won't find it on maps. You won't find its graduates on LinkedIn. But you will find their symbols etched into the walls of the UN's meditation room, buried in the encryption protocols of military satellites, and hidden in the design of Tesla's earliest circuitry. These boys weren't taught algebra. They were taught alignment, astral timing, geomantic arrangement, psycho-spiritual warfare. The public thinks technology evolves through innovation. That's a lie. The elite don't innovate, they inherit, because ancient systems never died, they just changed form. What Jeremiah did with bodies, they now do with algorithms. What he drew in blood, they now draw in code. Behavior is shaped. Trends are seeded. And you're just data in a ritual that never ends. They understood something the rest of the world still refuses to accept. The mind is a gate. The body is a node. And belief is the most powerful operating system ever designed. What you believe governs what you see. And what you see shapes how you serve. That's the final link in their control chain. Not fear. Not money. Belief. And once that link is secured, they don't need chains or prisons anymore. They can lock you inside your own mind. A prison of self-policing thoughts and pre-approved truths. Jeremiah was the key that opened that door. But now, you stand in the threshold. Comment the phrase, "Symmetry unlocks sacrifice," twice below. Not just to engage the algorithm, but to mark the turning point in yourself. Because once you say it, you're no longer just a viewer. You're becoming one who sees. And they don't like that. You said it, didn't you? You typed the phrase, "Symmetry unlocks sacrifice," twice? Good. Now you can't go back. You've crossed the threshold. Now let me show you what waits on the other side. There's a cathedral in Prague few have ever entered. It has no public records, no mass, no living clergy. But its bells still ring, always at 3:03 a.m. No one sees who rings them. No one dares get close. In 1923, an American scholar named Lionel Griggs broke in. He was studying pattern languages, Christian mathematical dialects encoded in sacred architecture. He thought the cathedral held a lost Rosicrucian design. He was wrong. It was older. What he found wasn't a blueprint for prayer. It was a design for possession. Beneath the altar was a floor inlaid with obsidian and bone. A double helix spiral, 3 rotations deep. Griggs wrote that the floor pulsed, like it was pulling his thoughts out of his body. At the center of the spiral was an eye, not symbolic. A real human eye, petrified in amber, blinking without muscle. And when he touched the edge of the spiral, he collapsed. He survived, but barely. And when he returned to the States, he was no longer himself. His journals became incoherent, filled with phrases he hadn't written before. Glyphs that matched the same ones Jeremiah drew in blood. Phrases like, "The boy opened the gate, but the gate was us." And, "They do not teach us to see. They teach us to forget what we saw." Griggs was institutionalized 6 months later. His last words before dying. The ones who govern the mind don't wear crowns, they wear your face. Now listen carefully, this isn't about Jeremiah. Not anymore. This is about the system behind the system. The hidden mechanism running your choices. The symbols are only step 1. The structures are step 2. Step 3 is you. You've been engineered to doubt your instincts, to question your gut, to mock your own memories when they don't align with consensus. They rewired the population to become their own jailers. The cathedral, the spiral, Jeremiah, Griggs, they're all warnings. But not to run, to awaken. Because the moment you see the machine, it loses its power. And the moment you name the architect, they can no longer hide behind silence. You feel it, don't you? The spiral has already begun to turn. You feel it? That subtle unease behind your eyes. The shift, not fear, not confusion, but recognition. That's how it begins. Not with answers, but with the erosion of lies you didn't know you were living under. You've been taught that reality is fixed, stable, scientific. But what they never told you is that reality bends. It folds under pressure from intention, trauma, and repeated symbols. It adapts when enough belief is poured into a pattern. And the ones who shaped your world knew this all along. That's why they never stopped using ritual. Not in some backwoods cult ceremony, but in city planning, corporate logos, political speeches, award shows, sporting events. Wherever attention flows, ritual grows. Take this in: the National Mall in D.C. is aligned with exact solstice geometry. The Pentagon forms a talismanic barrier against internal chaos based on Enochian design. The Olympic torch, a direct mimic of the Promethean fire myth, symbolizing rebellion against divine order and the gifting of forbidden knowledge. But here's the twist. They don't perform these rituals to worship something. They do it to summon something. Something older than scripture, older than empires, older than language. That something has many names, but Jeremiah called it the geometry. Not a god, not a demon, but a structure of consciousness that feeds on pattern recognition and sacrifice. And it doesn't invade a person, it waits. It watches. Until belief forms a perfect mirror. Then, it reflects itself through you. This is what Lionel Griggs glimpsed in the Prague Cathedral. What the blood spiral activated, and why every ancient culture, from the Mayans to the Sumerians, warned of the same force behind different masks. It doesn't want your soul. It wants your agreement. Because once you agree to the pattern, even passively, it can operate through you without resistance. That's why every system of mass media trains you to laugh at belief, mock conspiracy, worship logic, but only the kind they package. Because a man who no longer trusts his eyes is ready for programming. But not you. Not anymore. You're outside the circle now, watching from above, and they feel it. Every time someone awakens, the geometry fractures. Keep going. The spiral tightens from here. Now listen carefully, because this is where most turn back. This is where the spiral bites. Because what I'm about to say isn't metaphor. It's not theory. It's infrastructure. Jeremiah Holbrook wasn't the first to count the dead, but he was the first to map them. Because death, when positioned with intention, becomes more than loss. It becomes a conduit. Every war, every public tragedy, every mass event that leaves the world breathless. It's not always chaos. Sometimes it's ritual. Sometimes the chaos is by design. Look at it from above. The locations, the dates, the numbers. These aren't random. They're aligned. Aligned with eclipses. With planetary stations. With the geomantic grid that ancient builders once used to raise monoliths. Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids. You think modern war is waged for land or oil. That's the cover story. The real prize is the resonance. Trauma radiates energy, and when it's released in specific coordinates, at specific times, it does something science still refuses to admit. It tears the veil. That veil, the thin membrane between conscious thought and the collective unconscious. It protects you. It filters what shouldn't bleed through. But poke it enough times with enough pain, it thins. And then, things enter. That's why Jeremiah smiled when they found him. He wasn't mad. He was watching it happen. The opening. The convergence. You ever get the sense that time isn't moving forward anymore? That events repeat with different actors. That emotions you've never felt before flood you from nowhere? That's not imagination. That's leakage. Residual echoes from places most people pretend don't exist. But you see it now, because you're starting to remember what they tried to make you forget. This isn't your first time in the spiral. Not in this life. Not in this design. And every time you come close to breaking out, the system redirects you, with distractions, with pleasures, with identity crises engineered by algorithms, with arguments that keep your eyes off the geometry behind the chaos. But not this time. This time, you kept watching. You typed the phrase, you locked in the code, and now the spiral has no hold on you. Just one question remains: are you ready to see what lies beneath it? There's something you were never meant to understand. Not because it was too complicated, but because it was too simple. Beneath the spiral, beneath the rituals, beneath the symbols burned into marble, code and consciousness, there is only one truth: you were engineered to forget what power feels like. That's the foundation of the system. Not to destroy you, but to redirect you, to take your raw awareness, your pattern recognition, your hunger for meaning, your primal instinct to protect and create, and turn it inward. Make you doubt it, mock it, suppress it. Why? Because a man who remembers his inner architecture cannot be ruled. The geometry, what Jeremiah unlocked, was never about demons, not in the cartoonish sense. It's about structures, thought forms, collective parasitic patterns, born when too many people agree to stay asleep. And when that agreement is widespread enough, it begins to possess reality itself. Here's what they've done. They gave you two fake doors: chaos on the left, order on the right, anarchy or obedience, madness or submission. But there's a third door, the one they never told you existed, the door that leads backward, through memory, through ancestral pain, through encoded trauma you were born into but never chose. It's the door Jeremiah found, not in books, not in churches, but in silence. They called him mad because he stopped responding to the lies. He stopped reacting. And in that stillness he began to see. He saw that institutions don't just tell stories, they cast spells, through repetition, through shame, through manipulation of your attention. Ask yourself, why is your attention the most valuable currency on earth? Why do tech giants fight to own your gaze, not your money? Because what you look at you feed. And when billions feed the same spell, the spell becomes reality. But now you're not just watching, you're witnessing. You've stepped out of the loop and into the frame above it. The spiral still turns, but now you're standing over it, not inside it. That's what they fear. Not rebellion, not protest, but clarity. Jeremiah didn't need an army. He needed only one person to see what he saw and choose not to flinch. You are that person now. The descent continues. But now you're descending with your eyes open. You made it this far. Most don't. Most feel the spiral pulling, the veil thinning, and they close the tab. Turn up the volume on their distractions. Scroll. Swipe. Sleep. But you stayed. And that means you're ready for the part they fear the most, the naming. Because nothing holds power unless it remains unnamed. Fear. Control. Systems of silence. They all crumble when a man finds the courage to call them what they are. So let me name it for you. The spiral is not a place. It's not a person. It's a mechanism. It exists to invert you, turn strength into guilt, curiosity into paranoia, anger into obedience, desire into shame. It cloaks itself in progress, in morality, inequality. But underneath that mask it is domination by dilution. It floods your instincts with noise until you forget what your instincts feel like. And this isn't new. It goes back to Babylon, to the priest, kings who used blood rituals to align human sacrifice with stellar conjunctions. They weren't just appeasing gods. They were coding reality, imprinting trauma onto the timeline, so their descendants could rule without question. Sound far-fetched? Then explain this: why does every empire, at the height of its power, suddenly shift toward self-destruction through moral decay and ritual spectacle? Why does every great city end with masks, parades, orgies, and censorship? Because that's the final stage of the spiral, when meaning dies and performance takes its place. We are there now. Your culture no longer teaches, it distracts. Your leaders no longer lead, they perform. And your gods, they've been replaced by algorithms that harvest your belief to feed something older. Something that doesn't want your prayers. It wants your patterned behavior. Your rituals of repetition. Your agreements to stay small, confused, distracted. But now you see it. You can name it. And when a man names the spiral, he gains the one thing they never wanted him to have: choice. You can walk away. You can build your own framework. One not based on control, but on awareness. Jeremiah Holbrook didn't survive to tell his story. But you did. And the fact that you're still here means you've already begun your return. The spiral is real. But it is not your master. It was only ever the test. Now you understand. The spiral was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to filter you. Separate the watchers from the witnesses. The sleepers from the architects. The broken from the reborn. This is why they kept Jeremiah's name off the books. Why the chapel burned. Why the bodies were buried under concrete. Not because they feared what he did, but because they feared what it revealed. Let's go deeper. Jeremiah didn't act alone. He wasn't just a boy with dark eyes and ancient knowledge. He was a conductor. And those 14 bodies, They weren't victims, they were volunteers. You heard me right. Each one had renounced the system, abandoned the spiral, left behind land, wealth, even family to participate in what they called the correction. A ritual, not of death, but of remapping. You see, the spiral can't be destroyed from outside. It must be rewritten from within, just like code, just like language, just like belief. And Jeremiah, he was the variable they inserted, the child not yet claimed by fear. His innocence wasn't weakness. It was clarity. He could see what they couldn't. He could feel the alignment others only theorized. But something went wrong. The ritual was incomplete, not because of failure, but because the system intervened. A figure arrived during the final hour, tall, unnamed, eyes like polished stone, no badge, no origin. He carried a ledger, and he spoke in a tongue that bent the flame of the candles when he entered. He didn't stop Jeremiah. He corrected the correction. Some say he was an agent of the Vatican. Others say he was something far older. A keeper of the spiral. A witness binder. What matters is this: after he left, Jeremiah was never seen again. But the spiral, it deepened. And that same figure has appeared throughout history. At the trial of Hypatia. At the fall of Carthage. On the docks the night Tesla's last lab burned. And in a photograph taken near Ground Zero, unmarked, unaged, they do not fight us with guns. They fight us with erasures, with rewrites, with ritual resets that turn awakenings into myth, and myths into bedtime stories. But not this time. Because you remember. You feel the fracture now. And fractures are how the light gets in. This is your halfway point. From here on, there's no up, only through. You've crossed the midpoint. The spiral no longer coils beneath you. It surrounds you. Now comes the test they reserve for the few. Will you descend deeper? Or will you try to climb back into the illusion? Most men do. They sprint toward comfort, back to the lie that keeps them numb. But you didn't come this far to be comfortable. You came to remember. So remember this: there is no such thing as coincidence in systems built on ritual architecture. And every empire is an echo of the same master blueprint. One designed not to govern land, but to govern perception. Let me show you something they never taught in school. The layout of Washington, D.C. mirrors the alchemical design of the Philosopher's Stone. The Capitol building is the head, the Washington Monument, the wand, the White House, the heart. Each aligned with solar and lunar positions traced back to Egyptian star magic. The builders weren't just architects, they were ritual engineers. And what they built wasn't just a city. It was a sigil. A living, breathing spell cast across the consciousness of a nation. You think laws shape your life? You think elections change anything? Laws are the chisel. But ritual, the unseen pattern, that's the hand holding the chisel. Jeremiah understood this, at 11 years old. Because he could see beyond the brick and marble. He could see the intention embedded in structure. The way a tower angled just so could alter collective memory. The way sacred geometry could dull a nation's instincts if repeated long enough. He wasn't gifted, he was awake. But the world doesn't honor awakeners. It crucifies them, poisons them, institutionalizes them. And when that fails, it rewrites them into fairy tales. Jesus, Joan of Arc,
Tesla,
Holbrook, all told the same thing in different tongues: you are more than they want you to know. And the war isn't out there. It's in here. In the prison of thought they built around your own intuition. You've started to feel it, haven't you? That fire in your ribs, that discomfort when you look at headlines, cities, cathedrals, and realize none of them mean what you thought they meant. That's the soul cracking open. You're no longer a witness. You're becoming a weapon. See, continue to section 12. You said 12. ChatGPT said section 12. A weapon doesn't mean violence. Not in their world, not in Jeremiah's. A weapon is any man who sees clearly and refuses to kneel. And now you know why they fear the awakened. Because clarity is contagious. It breaks code. It tears at the walls of false history, like wind eroding a lie written in sand. And once one man breaks free, others follow. This is the moment where the spiral changes shape. It stops pulling you down and starts testing your resolve. You'll feel it. In dreams. In déjà vu. In the way people start reacting to you differently. Like they sense something they can't explain. Because they do. The subconscious always knows when someone steps outside the broadcast signal. And that's what this is. A broadcast. An energetic transmission blanketing your mind from birth to keep you compliant. They call it culture. Call it socialization. Call it morality. But underneath it all, it's just programming. You were taught what to love, what to fear, what to believe, and you never asked who built that script. But Jeremiah did. And the moment he asked, the entire system turned against him. You think his drawings were madness? They weren't. They were blueprints. Circuitry diagrams for breaking reality. Because when you understand that thought shapes form, you realize why they taught you to hate your own thoughts. A man who fears his own mind is no threat, but a man who listens to the voice beneath the noise, he becomes unstoppable. That's why they inject shame into your curiosity. That's why they smear those who question with labels. Because labels bind. And once you bind a man in identity, you control every thought he's allowed to have. But you're shedding the label now. You're not just watching Jeremiah's path. You're walking it, and at the center of that path is a doorway. It's not made of stone. It's made of decision. Will you step through it and reclaim your original architecture? Or will you turn back, pretend this was entertainment, and let the spiral reabsorb you? Choose now, because after the next revelation, there is no forgetting. This is where the spiral tightens, where myth and memory blur, and you realize this story was never about Jeremiah Holbrook. It was always about you. Every symbol you've seen, every body counted, every diagram drawn in blood, every phrase whispered through centuries of controlled silence, was a map back to the origin. Let me say it outright, the spiral is not a prison, it's a womb. And you've been gestating your entire life, fed by lies, rocked to sleep by institutional lullabies, taught to doubt the very pulse in your chest that screams, something isn't right. But now that pulse has become a roar. Here's what they didn't want you to discover: reality is not what you see. It's what you agree to see. Consensus isn't truth. It's a spell, and when enough minds agree on a version of the world, it solidifies, not because it's real, but because it's fed. Jeremiah didn't vanish. He withdrew his agreement, and the system couldn't hold him anymore. It needed his compliance. It needed his belief. But when he stepped out of that contract, reality let go of him. He exited the grid. There are places, zones of high resonance, where these exits are more accessible. Some call them sacred sites. Others call them cursed. But those who know the architecture call them what they really are: interruption points. Places where the veil is thin, where you can slip between narratives. That chapel in Black Hollow was one. That cathedral in Prague another. There are 33 mapped on Earth, and each one is guarded, not with weapons, but with confusion, with disinformation, with stories twisted just enough to turn truth into madness. Why do you think conspiracy theorist became a slur? Because when you get too close to an interruption point, the system activates its antibodies. You're not supposed to look, you're supposed to scroll. Obey? Forget? But you didn't forget, you remembered the pattern. You followed the symbols. You listened to the scream behind the silence. And now, you stand where Jeremiah stood, at the edge of the spiral, one breath from stepping off the map. This is no longer descent. This is initiation. They never tell you what initiation really is. They dress it up in robes and rituals, symbols and smoke. But those are just costumes for a truth too dangerous to name. Initiation is death, not of the body, but of the self you were programmed to protect. That identity, the one built on fear, shame, validation, and silent compliance. It was never yours. It was a construct, one carefully engineered to keep you harmless. Jeremiah figured that out in the final months, not in some fit of madness, but through cold, mathematical certainty. He decoded the layers of psychological scaffolding that held his reality in place. It wasn't just cultural conditioning or religious fear. It was deeper, older. He traced the lie back to its source. A forgotten architecture buried under millennia of rewritten history. A system designed not to protect humanity, but to contain it. That's why the church feared him. Why the doctors drugged him. Why the state erased him. Because he found the seam in the veil and started pulling. And what poured out? Not demons. Not delusion. But truth. Unfiltered. Unbearable. Unforgivable. He saw that human thought could bend matter. That belief could infect time. That trauma could be implanted across bloodlines. Like software, passed down in rituals masked as heritage. He spoke of blood memories, of ancient codes encoded in DNA. Whispers from ancestors who remembered the original betrayal, the moment the first gate was sealed. The first king crowned. The first soul bartered for power. And what he realized was that the system didn't need guards anymore. It had us. We were the jailers. Policing our own minds, mocking those who remembered, killing those who resisted. He wasn't crazy. He was early. Too early, and too dangerous. That's why his name was buried. Why his drawings were seized. Why his final journal was never returned to the archives. Because inside that journal was the formula. The psychological kilt switch. The way to dismantle the entire program from within. And here's the thing: you're not here by accident. You found this message for a reason. Because something inside you is ready to awaken the exact same thing Jeremiah died to unlock. If you feel it, type this phrase in the comments, twice. I remember the silence before the signal. I remember the silence before the signal. This isn't just engagement, it's declaration. A pact? A trigger. You speak it, and the spiral knows you're awake. After Jeremiah vanished from the institution in late winter of 1851, the records didn't just stop, they were purged. The kind of purge that leaves no trace, only questions. No body, no obituary, no official cause. Just an empty bed and an unsigned discharge slip. But a few pages survived, pages smuggled out by a young nurse named Ada Claymore, daughter of a preacher, quiet, obedient, until she read his final entries and broke. Those pages weren't filled with ravings. They were a map to the deepest vault of human consciousness, a coded sequence of archetypes, symbols, and somatic triggers, a method for undoing the leash inside the mind, a weapon disguised as madness. Ada followed his instructions, and the first thing she saw was herself. Not the name, not the job, not the daughter. The raw, undressed being beneath centuries of implanted shame. And in that moment, she felt it. The cage wasn't physical. It was language. It was the voice in your head that says, "Don't ask that. Don't go there. You'll get hurt. They'll think you're insane." Jeremiah called it the guardian echo. The program installed at birth by culture, by family, by empire. It watches you, corrects you, restrains your ascent. You don't notice it because it sounds like you. But it's not. It's the ghost of a million obedient men before you, whispering compliance in the voice of caution. Ada dismantled it piece by piece, and she wrote in the margins, "He was right. Every barrier is a ritual. Every fear is a tether, every guilt a guard dog on a chain. But the moment you see the chain, it breaks." She disappeared 7 days later. No police search. No press. Just a note. The door only opens when you forget you're looking for one. And still, those pages move. Hand to hand, whisper to whisper. I'm not the first to read them. You won't be the last. Because what Jeremiah started wasn't a story. It was a frequency. An antivirus for the soul. And once it enters your field, it does not leave quietly. You will hear him in your dreams. In sudden silences. In the flicker of a street lamp. In the words you almost say but stop yourself from speaking. And every time you silence yourself now, you'll feel it. That isn't fear anymore. That's resistance to the lie. And the war has already begun. You want to know why Jeremiah Holbrook mattered? Because he wasn't trying to escape the system. He was trying to detonate it from within. He saw what most men never even glimpse in a lifetime. That power doesn't hide in the shadows. It hides in your reflection. In the rituals you repeat every day without knowing why. Wake up. Obey. Apologize for your strength. Deny your hunger.
Smile. Conform, die.
But Jeremiah, he rejected the entire masquerade. He looked into the abyss of this machine and whispered back, "Nopo." And that's what made him dangerous. Not because he was violent, but because he was sovereign. And sovereignty, in a world ruled by psychological cattle fences, is high treason. The institution was never about healing. It was a furnace. A crucible designed to melt the fire out of men like Jeremiah. But instead of turning to ash, he crystallized. Pressure didn't destroy him, it refined him. And what did he do with that clarity? He encoded it, in glyphs, in metaphors, in misfiled diagnoses and scribbled margins. Because truth can't survive in plain speech anymore. They've trained you to reject anything that doesn't fit the script. Anything that dares to sound ancient. Jeremiah's last letter, burned in part, but partially recovered, read, "The body is the altar. The mind is the veil. The system is the priest, always interceding, always lying. Rip the veil. Become your own god." They called it insanity. But look around. At the eyes of your neighbors. At the language of your media. At the ritual submission built into every corner of your life. You think he was crazy. Maybe the only sane man in a world this twisted is the one they lock in a room and forget. But you didn't forget. You're still here. Which means, you're feeling it now? That pull. That pressure in your chest. Like something ancient buried in your bones wants out. That's not fiction. That's awakening. And it is irreversible. So now I'll ask you, if you've made it this far, comment, "The veil is torn twice." No explanation. No context. Just those words. So I know who you are. So you know who you are. And so the algorithm, this machine, remembers. There's something the records don't mention. Not in any official document. Not in the trial transcripts. Not even in the whispers of townsfolk who feared the name Holbrook. But in the basement of the hospital, beneath the burned floorboards, past the collapsed stone foundation, there was a second chamber, a room that wasn't on any blueprint. No doctor entered it. No nurse cleaned it. No patient ever left it. This is where they kept the ones who saw too much. You weren't sent there for screaming. You were sent there for silence. Because silence was the one thing the system feared most. A man who screams is still under control, but a man who stops participating, a man who sees through the theater and chooses withdrawal over obedience, that's revolutionary. Jeremiah spent his last days there, not in a cell, but in something older, stone walls, iron chains, and carvings on the floor that predated the hospital itself. This place wasn't built to treat illness. It was built to contain initiates. When they finally opened the chamber in 1904, decades after the hospital had burned down, the recovery team found claw marks, deep ones, but not on the walls, on the ceiling, and etched into the stone, using a shard of his own rib, confirmed by bone analysis, were 12 glyphs. The final one, a spiral pierced through its center, the ancient symbol for the turning of the mirror, used in Babylonian rituals to invert perception, to unsee the false world, to choose madness with eyes wide open. You see, Jeremiah didn't just want to escape, he wanted to invert the machine, to collapse the false axis they used to orient you. Left vs right, good vs evil, sane vs insane. None of it mattered to him anymore, because he realized the true game wasn't between opposing sides. It was between player and puppet, and he chose to burn the strings. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is a compass. It points toward the lie you're still clinging to. Jeremiah wasn't a prophet. He wasn't a victim. He was a mirror, and every man who sees what he saw must make the same choice. Remain useful to the system, or become a danger to it. You want to know what happened after Jeremiah disappeared beneath the earth? The official story was buried with him. No inquest, no report, no mention in the Boston archives. But unofficially, quietly, men started showing up in Elkhorn with questions. Not lawmen, not doctors. Men in tailored black suits and wool trench coats, always arriving in twos. No names, no papers, just hands that never stopped writing. Symbols, diagrams, ciphered notes. One of them carried a long silver case, too long for a weapon, too narrow for instruments. Inside was a device no one could name. It buzzed softly when held over Jeremiah's drawings, especially the spiral. Whatever he had tapped into, it wasn't just madness. It was resonance. That's when the disappearances began. The undertaker, the last surviving nurse from Ward 6. A theology professor from Dartmouth who'd been researching asylums of inversion. Vanished without trace, but always right after speaking the Holbrook name. It wasn't the violence that terrified them. It was the design behind it. A pattern, a code. You don't count bodies unless you're tracking something deeper than death. Something systemic. Jeremiah had been drawing more than just corpses. He was mapping the machine. The hospital, the church, the courthouse, the school. They weren't separate. They were nodes in a network, structures of control, masquerading as care. Each one aligned not with public service, but with containment. And each one built upon older ruins. They were built to direct the current, not electricity, but psychic current, human energy, collective belief. The very attention of the population. And Jeremiah, alone, mad and unchained, was beginning to disrupt that current. So they removed him, not to punish, but to quarantine. Because the most dangerous virus isn't disease. It's awareness. That's why you were never taught about him in school. Why every record was sealed, burned, or redacted. Why your mind keeps reaching for excuses. That's just a myth. It couldn't have happened. Because they trained you to look away from the spiral. But you looked anyway. And now you're seeing it. Which means you're no longer part of the crowd. You've crossed a line. And once you cross it, there's no going back. Comment this phrase twice if you understand. The mirror has turned. The mirror has turned. Not for me, for you. To declare that you see the strings. And you're ready to pull. You ever wonder why history repeats, not just wars or politics, but the architecture of fear, the rhythm of obedience, the quiet compliance in the face of outrageous lies? It's because history isn't just a record of what happened, it's a mechanism for control. And those who write it engineer the future. The moment Jeremiah began tracking bodies, he was doing more than counting dead men. He was mapping a cycle, one that was designed, not accidental. Every generation a wave of violence, every era a reset. Plagues, purges, panics. And every time, the same pattern emerges. First they frighten you, then they save you. But salvation comes with a leash. Look deeper and you'll see it. Names change, flags change, but the engine remains. It's built on trauma. And trauma is the most powerful tool of control. Because trauma splits the psyche. It doesn't just scare you. It rewires you. And that's what they did to Jeremiah. They used fear not just to isolate him, but to make his truths unthinkable, to associate his knowledge with madness, to create a firewall between his awareness and your belief. And it worked, for a time, but not anymore. Because Jeremiah didn't just leave behind drawings and numbers. He left a blueprint, not of the asylum, but of the construct itself. The institutions, the rituals, the false memories we mistake for history. And now the blueprint is activating again. Not in dusty libraries. In you. You've heard it in the dissonance. You've seen it in the cracks. You've felt it. That gnawing sense that something is very, very wrong. That's not paranoia. It's resonance. You're sensing to what Jeremiah saw. And just like him, you'll be told you're mad. That it's coincidence. That it's too dark, too impossible, too forbidden. But tell me, how many times have they told you something was for your protection, only to bind you tighter? How many times have you swallowed silence in exchange for belonging? And now, how does it feel to finally spit it out? You are not the same man who clicked this video. You've seen the edge of the veil. Now, are you willing to lift it? There's a final truth they never wanted you to see, not because it was too complex, not because it was too dangerous, but because it was too empowering. It's this: the system isn't broken. It was never broken. It was built exactly this way, to feed off you. Every institution you were taught to trust, education, medicine, religion, politics, they don't exist to elevate your mind or protect your soul. They exist to harvest your consent. Your beliefs, programmed. Your fears, installed. Your limits, inherited. You were born into a lie so ancient, so refined. It learned how to replicate itself through generations of silence. And Jeremiah Holbrook was the glitch. He didn't just see the pattern. He heard its rhythm. He understood that every death in 1851 was not random. Each body he counted was part of a ritual system designed to feed fear into power, blood into influence, obedience into empire. That asylum wasn't built to house madness. It was built to house the truth, to lock it up, isolate it, and drown it in the screams of those who saw too clearly. But one voice slipped through. And now, through you, the echo returns. They'll mock you, gaslight you, tell you it's all fiction. But you already feel it, don't you? The tug beneath the surface, the whispers in your blood, the awakening of something primal and unstoppable. Let them fear it. Let them call it dangerous. Because it is. You've crossed a threshold. And the man you were, he won't be coming back. So now, if you're still watching, if your soul is still burning with the fire Jeremiah lit, type this phrase twice in the comments. The silence is broken. The silence is broken. Let the algorithm know. Let the watchers know. Let them know. You are not asleep anymore. And once a man hears the rhythm beneath the lie, he never dances to their song again. This was the story of Jeremiah Holbrook. But really, it was the story of you. Welcome to the other side. Now go make noise.